Hey everyone, today we're diving into a really fascinating study that peels back the layers on what we think of as fairness at work. We all assume we know the rules, right? But what if there are hidden ones we don't even see? So let's get right into it.
Look, we all want to believe that our workplaces are these perfect meritocracies. The best person gets the job, the hardest worker gets that promotion. But a study in the Employee Responsibilities and Rights Journal kind of suggests the reality is, well, a lot messier than that.
So I want to kick things off with a question for you, just to have in the back of your mind as we go through this. When you really look around your own workplace, does it feel completely 100% fair? On one side, you've got the ideal we're all shooting for, right? A system built on hard work, merit, and an equal shot for everyone. But then there's the reality, which, as this research shows, is often shaped by these sneakier forces. Things like hidden biases, who you know, and these subtle little advantages that are so hard to pin down.
This study really zeroes in on two of these invisible forces: unearned privilege and favoritism. Now, these aren't the obvious, in-your-face kinds of discrimination. They're way more subtle, which, honestly, makes them so much harder to spot and even harder to do anything about. So let's break down what these actually mean.
First up, unearned privilege. The researchers describe this as the invisible stuff someone can rely on, but that they never actually earned. Think about it like this. Most scissors and desks are designed for right-handed people. It's not some evil plot, but it absolutely gives righties a tiny, unearned advantage they probably don't even think about. Well, that same idea can apply to things like your gender, your race, or even your family connections.
And this quote just nails the core problem, right? As Alan Johnson points out, privilege isn't just about one group getting a little leg up. It automatically means another group is at a disadvantage. When you're talking about things like promotions, which are a limited resource, it really becomes a zero-sum game.
The study gives this amazing real-world example from the retail world. For the longest time, the entry-level management job was literally called the third man. At the same time, men were usually hired for stocking jobs, which gave them inventory experience, while women were hired as cashiers. And since you needed that inventory experience to get promoted, the whole system, just by its design, created this fast track for men.
Okay, so what about the other concept here? Favoritism. This is more of an active choice. This is when a manager picks one person over others who are just as good, if not better, but for reasons that have zero to do with their skills, like they're friends or they come from the same background. So, how in the world did the researchers test for these biases? Well, they didn't just ask, hey, are you biased? No way. Instead, they kind of threw them into a tough spot, a moral dilemma where they had to make a really difficult ethical call.
So they got 180 retail managers, a good mix of men and women with all different levels of experience, and they put them to the test.
All right, so the managers got hit with two different scenarios. First, the promotion choice. You've got two assistants. One is way more qualified, but the other one, their family is tied to your biggest customer. Who gets the job? Then there was the advertiser problem. A huge advertiser for your company sold some really bad products. Do you publish the real story and probably lose their business? Or do you play favorites and bury the bad news? Seriously, what would you do?
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. Because when the researchers crunched the numbers, they found a clear and pretty surprising split in how people felt. And it wasn't just between men and women. It was also about how long they'd been a manager.
All right, first up, let's look at that first finding, the one about the promotion dilemma. The one with the family connections, a classic case of unearned privilege.
Okay, let's really dig into this graph because the story here is wild. Down at the bottom, you have years of experience, and up the side, how much they disapprove of this kind of privilege. Now look at the line for female managers. See how it's high and basically flat? Whether they're brand new or a 20-year veteran, they strongly disapprove of promoting someone based on who they know. But now, check out the line for the male managers. It starts high too, but as they get more and more experience, their disapproval actually starts to drop. The longer they're in the job, the more okay they seem to be with this kind of thing. The study suggests it might be because they see it more often and just start to accept it as how the game is played.
So what about that second dilemma? Playing favorites with the big advertiser to save the business. The results here were just as wild, but the pattern was totally flipped.
Here, we see almost the complete opposite. The line for the male managers is pretty stable. How they feel about this kind of favoritism doesn't really change over their career. But look at the women's line. It starts way higher than the men's, meaning new female managers really hate this idea. But as they get more experience, their disapproval starts to fall, until eventually it's at the same level as the men. So what's going on? Well, the researchers think that maybe women come into management with higher ideals, but over time, the real-world pressures of business cause them to adapt, and they start to see this kind of favoritism as maybe a necessary evil.
So, what's the big takeaway here? We like to think that more experience makes you wiser, fairer, but this study kind of throws a wrench in that idea. For men, when it came to privilege, experience seemed to make it feel normal. For women with favoritism, experience seemed to lead to a kind of reluctant acceptance. In both cases, more time on the job didn't get rid of the bias, it just changed it.
And look, this isn't just some interesting academic theory. These subtle ways of thinking have huge real-world consequences. They create what the researchers call a tilted playing field that can mess up an entire company.
Because think about it, when people feel like the system is rigged, that it's not about what you know, but who you know, the fallout is huge. We're talking about more people quitting, productivity tanking, and a total loss of trust in the people in charge. It can even lead to employees acting out in negative ways, and of course, the potential for some very expensive lawsuits.
And this brings us to what might be one of the biggest takeaways from this entire study. We usually focus all the ethics and bias training on the new folks, right? But this data suggests it's actually the experienced veteran managers who might need it the most to help them unlearn the biases that can quietly take root over a long career.
So, we're going to end right where we started, with a question for you. This study shines a light on these powerful, often invisible rules of privilege and favoritism. It really makes you stop and think. What are the unwritten rules that are shaping your career and the careers of the people all around you? It's definitely something worth thinking about.